Shukran.
Alhamdulillah. Shukran, Muhammad Farid. I hope you will be able to join us if time allows. You're a valuable participant in these meetings. Now, I want to say that we've reached the point now where we've discussed all the conceptual attributes. I will briefly, you see what makes this topic of Tawhid a little bit difficult for us to understand, because the words we use are words that we are not necessarily familiar with. And if you are not 100% sure, please ask so that we can explain. But I am going to try my best to go through it so that we can understand where we are at now. We've dealt with all the conceptual attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And when we say conceptual attributes, then we are talking about the attributes that we've discussed, and they are let me just put it up here for you. The conceptual attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are all those attributes that we've mentioned previously. We said Allah is all powerful, or Allah has power. Allah wills, Allah is all knowing, Allah is all hearing, Allah is all seeing, and Allah is all speaking. Now, if we look at the 7 that we are going to do, those would be the ones that is in black. Now, they are paired with the ones that's come up in red, and you can see it almost sounds like the same. All powerful and power, willing and will, all knowing and knowledge, living and life, all hearing and hearing, seeing and sight, speaking and speech. I must be very honest, when I was going through this, I could not understand what the difference is between the 7 that we are dealing with now and the 7 that we dealt with before, because they looked like exactly the same to me. Now, let me just use an example, and I want people to understand this, because these are part of the 20 Sifaat. Let me recap. We've dealt with the self-attribute, wujud, and then the 5 negating ones. That makes it 6. Then we dealt with the previous 7, which are these ones here on in red. So 6 plus 7 is 13. And now we're dealing with another 7, which looks the same as the previous 7. Now, if we don't understand the connection, then we don't have a proper understanding of the 20 Sifaats of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it's important that we, if we are not clear, that we actually ask, so that when we leave this section, then we've actually dealt with all 20 of the Sifaat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, let me use the one of hearing, number 5. We dealt previously that Allah has the ability to hear. Now, if Allah has the ability to hear or see or speak, doesn't mean, or let's use a human example. As a human being, I'm able to hear, see, and speak. Does it mean I am actually seeing now? Muhammad Fasir? Does it mean because I have the ability to see that I'm actually seeing?
I think, okay, this is my case. The sight that human being has is described as sight by a human being, but it's only a portion of what is existing as sight in its totality. So I see in my capacity to see. So you can't call it sight in its totality.
Yeah. Yes, but the point that I'm trying to make here is that if I am sleeping and my eyes are closed, do I have the ability to see?
No.
Yes, you do.
I do have the ability to see. I'm
Yes.
still the same person. I have the ability to see, but I'm sleeping and my eyes are closed. So I am not seeing at that point, but I have the ability to see. Do you understand?
Correct.
Do we understand that?
Yes,
Let's
yes.
just make that clear. If I cover my ears, I am able to hear. I have the quality of hearing, but it doesn't mean that I'm at that moment that I can, or for that matter, speaking. I have the ability to speak, but am I speaking when my mouth is closed? No. Now, what the 7 Sifaat, the affirmative conceptual attributes, and I couldn't find easier words to describe these difficult concepts. Affirmative means it confirms, it establishes that as truth. That is the word affirm. It says that it is correct. Now, Allah has power, Allah has will, Allah has knowledge, Allah has life, Allah has hearing, Allah has sight, and Allah has speech. But Allah is actually alive. Allah is actually hearing and seeing and speaking without anything that needs to happen first. Like if my eyes are closed, I'm sleeping, I have to open my eyes before I can actually see. Nothing like this ever applies to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So although they are very similar, the proofs in terms of how the scholars have dealt with proving these sifat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are exactly the same. But the key thing here is that it is not a quality that needs to be activated. Allah is all seeing and all hearing before we were even created. So it means the whole question of dependence on anything that's been created is removed if we understand these sifat properly. Now, before I go on, I want to hear if the concept is clear now. Let's just hear from anyone. This is a bit technical, I know, and might seem complicated. If it is that people wish me rather to move on, then I will do so.
Yes, Peter Salie, can I?
Yes.
We're trying to ascertain the difference between the Manie and the Ma'nawiyah. The Ma'ani, you call it the conceptual sifats, and then the Ma'nawiyah that we call what's the English word? Yeah, affirmative. Okay. Affirmative, yeah. But now my understanding is that the affirmative attribute is the conceptual attribute in action.
Yeah.
In action.
Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah.
Allah has power, that's why he needs to be powerful.
Yes.
Powerful. He's got the quality of will. That's why he must be willing.
Yes.
So we can say, you know, the word conceptual attribute, you can also say descriptive attribute.
Yeah.
You know, it's just a matter of using a word which is easy to define.
Yeah.
The ma'ani and the ma'nawiyah.
Okay.
Shukran.
I think to draw from what Imam Hussein has said is that if we look the ones that are on the right hand side of the screen in red, then we will say all those qualities of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The affirmative ones are the same qualities but in action. They're operative. They're not waiting to be triggered. So I'm going to leave it like that because there's very little point in going further. But I thought for all our purposes, it would probably be useful to go through just a very brief recap of what we say is an attribute. Now, linguistic means the language meaning or the dictionary meaning of the word attribute. Now, we say Allah is, we're describing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with the sifaat or the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, attribute in terms of the dictionary meaning is when you are describing a quality or an ability of something. That is an attribute. It could also, in the world, it could be a feature or a characteristic that is closely associated with something. That you say that man is very tall. When you look at the man, then you know that that he is not short, you know he is tall. You're describing a feature or a quality of that person. Now, of course, when we are talking about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we are not only, we can't see Allah. We can never, ever see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It doesn't matter what your status is or how pious you are. It's impossible for us to see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, one of the things that will make it easier for us to understand why it is impossible is because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's greatness and perfection has absolutely no limits. It cannot, Allah as our Rabb, our creator, cannot be described with an image or an idea. Allah looks like this or Allah looks like that. So how do we describe Allah? We describe Allah as Sifaat, the attributes. So knowing the attributes is one of the ways that we get to know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, the attribute is not Allah. We can say Allah is merciful. Merciful, or let's say, let's use merciful. Let's say merciful. Can we say merciful is Allah? No. But is Allah merciful? Yes. So how the people, the scholars have overcome this problem, they say, although merciful is not Allah, it is also not other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But it becomes extremely technical. I'm almost sorry that I went so deep into this aspect because it can throw people off. But just to clarify it a little bit more, the attribute is not Allah, but Allah has that attribute. To use a worldly example, the tree is green. green is an attribute of the tree. But can we say green is the actual tree? Can we? We can't. Green is something that must be associated with something else. So green is not the tree, but the tree is green. I want to rather move on, but before I move on, I want to ask if there's any other question before I move on from this point.
Yeah, Salie, and I agree. It is very important that you need to go into the technical field, into those things to understand this, the whole concept of that. Because it's very important, it's very, unlike a very exact same way the Christians are using the Trinity compilation. So in other words, they're using as the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost type of effort. They use the very same concept as to say, yeah, but he is attached to the attribute of Allah is not Allah, but he possesses that. It is not that this divisible. He cannot divide him into a section. He is eternal, or he is that. No, he is Allah in Clark. He's not. He cannot be divided into any of his attributes because he consists. The attributes is dependent on him himself.
Alhamdulillah. Shukran. Shukran for that very nice elaboration there. Is there anyone else who would like to maybe clarify the understanding that when we talk about the Sifaat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Sifaat describes something about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but it is not Allah. Allah is Allah. But is that Sifaat of Allah, which is also perfect, also without beginning, also without end, is it other than Allah? Is there anything else that can be described with that Sifaat? No. So that Sifaat, that attribute, that description can only apply to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it is not other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Aisha, do you want to
I
say
just
something?
wanted to say, just correct me if I'm right or wrong. I wrote here the attribute is not Allah, but Allah has the attribute. Is that correct?
Yes, that's 100% correct. But you can add there what you've written down. But the attribute of Allah is not other than Allah. What is other than Allah? Anyone? What is other than Allah?
Allah's creation is, for lack of a better word, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the creator. So everything else is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created.
Alhamdulillah, mashallah. Very good. Very good. If it is not Allah, then it must have been created by Allah, because Allah is the only creator. So if we say it is not other than Allah, it helps to clarify the concept. It's such a difficult thing to understand that the scholars have used it. In fact, somebody that you got to know for other reasons, Ibn Arabi. Ibn Arabi, you know, through the Netflix series Ertugrul. He is one of the most learned scholars in Tasawwuf. He has started describing, and many people have used this concept. The Sifaat is not Allah, but it is not other than Allah. So write that piece down. It's equally important, Aisha, to add that part. So nobody else, when we say it's not other than Allah, it means nothing else can be described with the way we describe Allah. Only Allah qualifies to be described like that. And nothing in creation ever qualifies for that kind of description that is used when we talk about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
If I may add something, Salie, the main part that we need to understand is Allah is not like any of His creation. The moment we get that understanding, Because our ability of thinking of associating anything is creation. Because we've seen something, we've witnessed something, we've things like that. But Allah is none of those things.
Yeah, alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah.
It doesn't consist of space. Yes, but then people look at it and says, but hold on. Now, if Allah is everywhere, why did Allah take his Prophet Muhammad up to the 7th samawat to give him, for argument's sake, the salah? So, what does that indicate? Does that indicate space and place? Do I understand the reasoning?
Yeah,
I'm,
but
I'm throwing a spanner in the wheel as to how people
hang on. We go.
misconstrue the whole understanding of everywhere, eternal and omnipresent.
Yeah, you see, we've actually been through the different Sifaat of Allah, dealing with space and how we should understand space and where is Allah. In fact, that was one of the questions. If somebody were to ask, where is Allah? We've been through some of that, and I don't actually want to repeat that now.
No problem.
But your point is well taken. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala cannot be associated or be described to anything that we know of. Anything. It doesn't matter what it is that we know. Allah can never ever be described or be seen to be similar in any way to creation. Somebody else wanted to make a point as well?
Yes, Peter Salie. In Arabic, we just say ghayrullah, other than Allah, or they've penned the term aghyar. If you say aghyar, it means anything else other than Allah. Like in the phrase ma fi qalbi ghayrullah, there's nothing in my heart except Allah. So it's Allah and ghayrullah. Allah and his, like you can say, like his creation.
You see, when we
so the word ghayrullah explains that.
Yeah, alhamdulillah.
You can say a lot of things in English, but ghayrullah explains the whole concept.
Yeah, okay. Is there any other comment or question before we move on then?
ليس كمثله شيء وهو السميع.
Yes, there's nothing that can be compared to Allah. It's one of the Sifaat that we've described previously, and it impacts on how we understand the whole question of what is a Sifaat. So when we talk about the importance of understanding what is an attribute of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it is through that we get to know Allah. If we don't know Allah, then how can we worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala the way Allah ought to be worshipped? But Allah's perfection has no limit. Allah's perfection is not something that we say Allah is so perfect, and then you come to a point where you say that is perfection. Allah's perfection has no limit. It's endless, which means knowledge about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is endless. That's why the awliya, and may Allah be pleased with all of them, they climb a ladder of getting to know Allah better throughout their lives. As they climb this ladder of getting closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the more they make progress, but their progress will never lead them to a point where they can say they truly know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Why is it possible that no one can truly know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Why? I'm asking a question now.
Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is beyond our comprehension.
Yes. The key here is perfection. if Allah is the only perfect being, the only perfect being who can be described with total and utter perfection. What does perfection mean? Perfection means there is nothing that can be added or modified or taken away from, that it's utterly and totally perfect. Allah is the only one who can be described like that. Then Allah is the only one who can know himself truly in his total perfection. So for human beings to climb the ladder of getting to know Allah, the Arifin, the Awliya, they are people who are described as the Awliya, the friends of Allah, the knowers of Allah. They climb this ladder constantly, from one step to the next step, to the next step, to the next step, endlessly. Because Allah's greatness, Allah's majesty has absolutely no bounds. What a wonderful experience that must be, to climb this ladder of joy and happiness and ecstasy as you get to know Allah better. So Allah opens more doors, you get to know Allah better and more. And Allah's nur and barakah starts falling on your heart and even on your physical senses and your abilities. And this is what the awliya is experiencing for every second of the day. Subhanallah. Let me leave that point there now and go on to the next area. So we've dealt with now the next, there's 20 sifat, that's wajib, and that's 20 sifat or attributes which are totally impossible for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, I don't want to go into a lot of detail about this, because the attributes which are impossible for Allah are in fact just the opposite of those ones that we spoke about previously. Let me get some idea of whether people feel that we should actually go through all of them individually, because it is so obvious that when we talk about, for example, wujud, the existence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the opposite of existence is non-existence. In other words, there are people who believe there is no God. Now, the sifat of wujud, the way we have discussed it, we have proven, or we have dealt with the sifat of wujud, and yes, we are convinced that Allah does exist. We are also aware that Allah has no beginning and Allah was never born. Those are impossible. Now, one of the things that I must say about all of these sifat, which are probably equally important, is that all the sifat that you see in front of you, non-existence, beginning, death or end, similarity, dependence, more than one, applies not only to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's essence, the actual divine being itself, but it equally applies to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's sifat. Allah's sifat always existed of whatever sifat we are talking about. Say we're talking about existence as one of the sifat. That always existed. There wasn't a point at which it was not. So it didn't have a beginning, and there's no point at which that sifat will not apply anymore. There's no point when we talk about similarity. there's no point either in the past, the present, or the future where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will be similar to anything that Allah created. There's never ever a point where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or any of his sifaat will depend or need anything. It's not reliant on anything, it's self-reliant. And the last one would be that the sifaat is that there's only one Allah, but it also means that there's only one sifaat that can be applied to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with respect to that particular quality. And it can never be applied to creation under any circumstances. These are the 5 negating sifaat and the sifaat of wujud, self sifaat. And before I move on, let me just hear if there's anything that anyone wishes to say on this before I move on to the next part. I assume not.
So instead of saying with Salie 20 sifats, there's actually 40, because it's your wajib and your mustaqil.
Yeah.
So there's actually 40.
It's technical. It's almost one of those things where it is and it is not. The 20 sifat that we are talking about must be present. You can't describe Allah without the 20 sifat. And because of the 20 sifat, there are 20 sifat which can never ever be applied to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's why they only
opposites.
Yeah, it's exact opposite. Exact opposite. It mirrors that in an opposite way. But that's why we talk about the 20 sifat and not the 40 sifat. But you have to know as part of your Tawhid what the opposites are. When you say Allah has no beginning, for example, then you must know that whenever you see anything in creation that has a beginning, say somebody wants to describe to you an alternative to Allah, somebody who's whatever he is, not even an atheist, but could be a different type of believer, and he comes to a point where he says, now that started like that. The moment he talks about something starting from a certain point, then he's talking about one of the opposites of Allah's sifat, which means that can never be Allah. If it's at certain point it ceases to exist, then that also points. And so the 20 opposite sifat are very, very important. In fact, it's important in the way we understand the first 20. Makes it easier for us to understand the 20 sifat if we know what is not possible at all for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay. So should I still go through the other, because the others would be equally the other attributes, power, will, knowledge, life, hearing, seeing, and speech. As you can see, what is up there, those are the opposites, which means whenever you find any of that present, then you can never be talking about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
The mere fact that if you accept the dependence or the independence on anything, that already tells you that, hold on, nothing else can also. If it's Allah's all hearing, then there's nothing else that can surpass that part.
Yeah, Allah can never be deaf. There's
no, when
it
doesn't make sense.
Yeah, no, what one must, for example, we dealt with it when we dealt with the Sifaat of
Yeah.
all hearing. But for example, one of the ways we would use this information, there's never a time when Allah does not hear everything. It's easy to say Allah hears everything. Even children say that. Allah is all hearing, Allah can hear everything. But if we apply, for example, hearing, the Sifaat of hearing, Allah is all hearing or all seeing, and we use the concept of time. Now you test your understanding. How do you understand all seeing and all hearing? There's never a time that Allah does not hear or Allah does not see. So let's be provocative now. We are sitting here and we are talking. Did Allah hear what we're saying? Did Allah can hear now, but did Allah hear what we were saying before we were born?
Yes.
How?
Because he's all knowing.
Not all knowing, hearing. We're talking hearing now.
Yeah, but because he is all knowing, that you know exactly what you were going to say at a specific time.
That's all. Yes, but that describes knowledge. That's the Sifaat of knowledge.
Exactly, because you cannot divide anything from that. Remember, all those things go hand in hand. You cannot take the all knowing from the all hearing and from the all seeing, because that is attributes that exist. And Allah, because all those things goes hand in hand.
Yes.
Now, that's my understanding.
Yes, no, you're right. But the point here is what makes it easier for us. Every Sifaat must be understood in a particular way. When you say we're talking about hearing, did Allah hear what I was going to say before I spoke? Oh, Aisha, did Allah hear what you are going to say now when you're going to answer, before you actually answered?
Yes, I believe Allah hears what is in our hearts, even what we don't even say out loud. Allah hears that, what we think.
You see, you both of you are coming to the question of knowledge. Allah is all knowing.
Oh.
But we're talking about hearing. The ability to hear is when there's sounds being emitted. And we dealt with sound, how sound is generated, the laws that Allah created of how sounds will be generated. Okay, let me put the question even another way. Just hang on. I answer it now after I've rephrased the question.
Okay.
Allah was alone. Allah didn't create anything yet. Did Allah hear what we are saying now? I'm not created, you're not created.
You said Allah doesn't need a trigger to hear. Allah doesn't need a sound or ears.
Very good.
Allah.
Why? Why is that so?
Allah hears us before we even speak.
Yes, but why can we say that with certainty?
Because Allah is all hearing. Before we were created, Allah was all hearing.
Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah. Allah was all hearing before we were even born, Allah was already all hearing. Allah didn't need for us to come into existence first and then speak. Then once the sound is generated, then Allah hears. The second part that makes that the answer to that question easier would be, what other tool must you use? So now you got a very powerful tool. Allah was all hearing before Allah even created creation, because Allah was not in need for the sound to first be created or made or generated. Allah was already all hearing. What's the other tool that we must use to explain this? Not just this one, but the other Sifaat as well.
I think, Salie, you need to go back to your Sifatu Salbiya, with the beginninglessness and endlessness. Allah's hearing is without beginning, without end. So the Sifat under the Ma'ani, the conceptual Sifat, how can I say, harmonize them with the Salbiya. If we take hearing, the hearing's got to be without beginning, without end.
Now, how would you use that, Imam Hussein? How would you use that your hearing is without beginning and without end, to explain that Allah heard what we were saying before we were even born? How would you bring the 2 points together? That what you said now.
Without beginning, without end, the time in between, Allah hears everything. Nothing has escaped Allah's hearing.
Yes.
Allah's hearing is not dependent on time.
Shabnam, MashaAllah, MashaAllah. That's the one I was looking for. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not dependent on anything. On anything. And Allah, I don't know if everyone was here when we dealt with that. How even scientists, in modern day science, they've confirmed there was a point in the universe where time did not exist. Can you believe it? Scientists are saying this. Scientists have said there was a point in the universe where there was no time, no energy, no space, no natural forces, nothing. So if time did not exist, they can't explain how, but they've come to that conclusion, and it's almost universally accepted. If time didn't exist, then time had to be created. And if it was created, you can never use time now to apply it to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Can we understand the point that Shabnam has alluded to here? That Allah is not dependent on time. So, before we were even created, apart from Allah's knowledge, Allah didn't have to wait for the time. Now the world is 13.8 billion years old, we are told. For 13.8 billion years to elapse till here, Salie, Manie, and a few people are sitting and they're talking. Now Allah hears. That would make Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala dependent. Now, any other sifat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala must equally be understood with reference to time, that time never ever applies to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's easy to make statements like space and time never applies to Allah, but we must be able to explain it. Otherwise, it's just an empty statement. It doesn't make your heart solid. It doesn't make you confident about how you believe in Allah. So when we say about time, and we bring the time element into it, and you say because Allah created time, time can never apply. So the concept of thinking as human beings, how do you think outside of the dimension of time and space? Very difficult. That's why Allah referred to the believers as the people who believe in the ghaib, the people who believe in the unseen. Because in the material world, this universe of ours, you can only understand things with respect to the dimensions of time and space. Otherwise, you can't understand things. If you remove those two things, but those very two things are the things that did not exist before, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created. You want to add to that, Shabnam?
No, oh, that's fine. I don't want to add to that.
Okay, is there anyone else who would like to? I was so hoping that we would, in fact, I misjudged it. I thought that we would be able to get onto the Sifaat, the next part of cause and effect. Cause and effect is where many people previously have gone wrong in how they believe as Muslims. The understanding that Allah has created every single effect in the universe. Allah created human beings, but Allah also created the actions of human beings. Now that was a topic that many people for centuries have been struggling about and went completely off the correct path of belief. Now, with a little bit, may Allah make it that some of this information that we've covered up to now, we're going to use that information about how we understand and know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala Sifaat, that we're going to use that information and now apply it so that in our understanding about things like cause and effect and good and bad comes from Allah, that dua is the only thing that can change the decree of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. How do we understand predestination and those kinds of things? With the use of our understanding of the Sifaat, the proper understanding, these things won't become easy, will never be easy. It will always be difficult, but it will become easier, inshallah. So before we go there, just to conclude on, because we in a sense have dealt with the 20 Sifaat in a fair amount of detail, and we've basically just glanced over those that are not possible or which can never be applied to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If there's anything that anyone after this reflects on and want to bring it up, we can always go back. But for now, I think we've dealt with the Sifaat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Can I just then ask if there are any final comments or questions that people would like to pose, or any clarity that we need to give before we conclude on the session? Muhammad Fasir?
But Salie, not particularly on the subject matter, but maybe related, is that obviously tonight we'll once again be bringing the replay of the Tawhid series, and we're dealing with essentials of Tawhid tonight. So people can tune in between 11 p.m. and 12 p.m. this evening, inshallah. And we'll be going right back to the beginning of the book, inshallah.
Muhammad Fasir is talking about the Voice of the Cape program tonight. We're also doing a Voice of the Cape program where we've actually gone to the beginning of the things that we've discussed up to now. And there's a replay tonight between 11 and 12. At some point, you can actually get the copies of that by going to the link. It's not uploaded yet. But what I have done also is I've taken not all, but many of, or most of what we have dealt with so far, and I've uploaded it on YouTube. So if there's any area on your own, you can take your time and go through certain areas, go back, rewind, fast forward, to check up on any area. Because let me just say this, knowledge belongs to you. Knowledge is, Rasulullah SAW said that knowledge is the lost property of the believer. So if anywhere along the way we have managed to learn new things, then it doesn't matter where you got it from. That knowledge is your property now. It belongs to you. It doesn't matter where you got it from. So we must try on our own now to go and embark on that path of pursuing how can we improve our knowledge, because at the end of the day, the relationship between you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is a very personal one. You must do whatever you can to get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And anything that you can use, use it in a way where that will help you. It's not a question of Imam Hussein has made a point that you never understood before, and that knowledge is Imam Hussein's knowledge. If anything, all knowledge belongs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Knowledge belongs to Allah. So if we treat knowledge as a sacred trust almost, then we will make lots of progress, inshallah. Can I hear if there's any final other comments or questions? If not,
regarding the Sifaat, we did the 20 wajib. There's another one Sifaat which we missed out.
Which one?
The Jaiz, Wajib, Mustahil, Jaiz. 3 categories.
Yeah. Yes.
Allah can create or He can leave. There's one Sifaat like that, which makes it 41.
Yes.
20,
no,
20, what do you say? 20 wajib,
yeah.
20 mustahil, the opposites, yes. And then there's one jaiz, probable.
Yeah,
they call
in
it
fact,
probable.
Let me quickly deal with that
Allah
one.
Can create or He can leave it off.
Yeah,
Yeah.
quickly to deal with that. In fact, you have already dealt with it by mentioning it, but it is to say there's never a compulsion on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In fact, one can go quite deep into that sifat of jais, but to just make sure that we don't lose out on it, it is that it's possible for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to do or not to do whatever Allah pleases to do. It's as simple that there is never ever a compulsion on Allah. There is never ever a motive for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah does whatever He pleases to do. And we must remember that that is some of the responses that will apply to when people ask the question, but why? We often ask the question, why? Then that Sifaat, the 41, the 41st one, is that Allah can do whatever Allah pleases to do. But if we need to go back to it, we can go back to it. But I'm going to conclude now on that note and remind people that our Wednesday session has been changed to 4 o'clock. So we'll start at 4, inshallah, because there's been a request. Alhamdulillah, some people have been affected by the lockdown in a positive way. They will be going back to work. And we hope, inshallah, that all of us will not suffer too much, both materially, physically, and socially from this lockdown, but actually come out of this lockdown a lot stronger and more determined in wanting to get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So Wednesday at 4, inshallah, will be our next session. And we're going to ask Rashad, the Roos to actually make the closing dua for us. Inshallah. Tafaddal. Are you still with us, Rashad? Mr. Daroos. I think he may have left us.
No, he's still there.
No, his photo is there.
His mic is muted.
But he looks muted also. No, that's not. He's not on there. Tafadhal Imam Hussein. Bismillah.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala ashrafil mursaleen. Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala ali wa sahbihi ajma'een. Allahumma arhamna, arham walidina, arham awladana, arham aqribaina, warham astiqaina, warham ikhwanina fillah, warham shaykhuna, washfi mardana, warham mautana, warham ummata Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار وادخلنا الجنة مع الأبرار يا عزيز يا غفار يا رب العالمين. وصلى الله تعالى على خير خلق ونور عرشي محمد مصطفى صلى الله عليه وسلم وأصحابه أجمعين. وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين. الفاتحة.
Shukran very much, everyone.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam. Tamam, Salie, ek weet ek het 'n paar klasse gemis het, but due to other commitments.
No, we understand fully. I'm just happy that you were able to join us, alhamdulillah. But what I am very upset about is that was veel from the Atemaak to Janani Dani.
Oh, Mark, you know, see, this is the sad part of this thing. So now, while I was busy, another call came through, and
alhamdulillah, we accept.
Inshallah.
No, but
I
please.
come here where you
I'll send the recording.
Shukran very much, everyone. May Allah be pleased with all of you and your families, and we'll